And we've speculated in our coverage of these elections that this year could be simply a major year for Republican gains or a transformative year for the GOP in Arkansas. I discussed the subject earlier with Dr. Janine Parry, professor of political science at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Parry, let's talk first about what we saw on Tuesday. Huge Republican gains at many different levels, the federal level, state level, definitely the local level. You would suggest that one cycle does not make a trend, but what can we take away from these big Republican gains?
I think what we can take away from these Republican gains is that for once, and we haven't really seen this in recent Arkansas history, we saw several data points that were suggestive finally of two-party competition. Now, of course, I want to see a cycle or two or three more, right, to see if the candidacies and the victories at all levels and across all branches are sustained. But what I like is that we saw gains in the state legislature in both chambers. We saw gains for the U.S. House seats. We saw a gain in the U.S. Senate seat. There were state constitutional, right, office activity. I mean, there was a lot going on here to suggest finally, right, something that's been predicted for, 20 plus years, which is at least competitive two-partyism. Again, I tend to be measured about these things. I'd like to see another cycle or two, but I like that there were a lot of data points this year to suggest what we've all thought was coming.
Why do you think the Republicans were so successful? What was it, things happening at the national level that kind of filtered down to the state level? Was it the quality of the candidates that they recruited, or was it a combination of a couple of things?
I would answer that I think if you were to sort of speak to the landscape in general, really there were two major things working to Republicans' benefit. One is certainly just a national anti-Democrat, pro-Republican generic climate. Your viewers know that. And that advantaged Arkansas Republicans as it did Republicans elsewhere. At the same time, Arkansans this year, I think in many cases, put their best foot forward in the sense of electability. So they didn't necessarily, they didn't nominate the candidates, for example, who played hardcore to the hardcore right on the social issues, but rather talked about taxes, talked about the economy, and again, that goes back to this climate. That was, I think, the message to send. So certainly John Bozeman's victory, not just his victory, but coming out of an 8-way race without the need for a runoff. He was the more centrist candidate in that race. We saw something similar in a large field of candidates up in Northwest Arkansas in the 3rd Congressional District. So, and we even saw some of that in some state legislative races. So it was the combination of a national climate that was good for Republicans, together with, I think, a more mature Republican Party nominating some candidates that were electable in high-profile races.
Governor Mike Beebe, Congressman Mike Ross seemed to be the two Democrats who escaped this Republican storm that hit Arkansas. What do you think it was that made them such compelling Democratic candidates?
Well, it's interesting how you can look at Beebe. I mean, certainly you can look at McDaniel, who didn't, even attract a major party challenger. You can look at Mike Ross. I mean, certainly they had the advantage of incumbency, right, where Republicans picked up gains in some of those higher profile races. There was an open contest. Not in every case, but in many cases. So they were incumbents. They certainly walk the middle of the road in terms of economic policy and also in terms of social policy. In terms of Ross, I would argue, even in particular, in the message that he articulated during this campaign, it probably wasn't even middle of the road. It was sort of a center right, if not right, on some of the hot button issues. So he found himself actively and successfully, unlike Senator Lincoln, running against Washington, D.C. and, talking to a certain degree about God's gun and gays and, sort of these strategies that sometimes work for Arkansas Republicans and sometimes don't. In this case, I think it worked well for an Arkansas Democrat. So I think they're center-of-the-road candidates, they're incumbents, they have good name recognition, and so, they were able to capitalize on the things that Arkansas Democrats have long capitalized on.
Do you think Governor Beebe will modify his governing style with the new makeup that he'll now deal with between Republicans and Democrats in the state legislature, kind of versus what we've seen historically?
Right. Indeed, he may need to. I mean, the difference is so significant. He may need to, reach out for more compromises or, shift some of his policies down the road. But if we say shift in governing style, it's hard to know exactly what that means. So I guess I'm looking for it. I'm just not sure what I'm looking for.
All right, last question for you, Dr. Parry. A lot happened between 2008 and 2010 in terms of the political landscape, both nationally and in Arkansas. Do you think we can see as volatile of a shift in 2 years in our next election cycle?
Well, I guess that was kind of the message of my talk today, is that there's tremendous volatility, and there long has been in the Arkansas electorate. So we'll see these surges, and Republicans will show, some really high-profile inroads, and then, something will happen, a new wave or a new issue will come up, and they'll sort of swing back. I think there were enough advances this time that it's unlikely they go back to the place that they were in 2006 or short of the presidential race in 2008. I don't think that we're likely to go back to that place. But whether or not they can hang on to these significant gains, I think that remains to be seen. In some ways, I think that's an unrealistic expectation, right? That they may have really, for a number of reasons that we discussed, experienced a surge this time, but to expect them to hang on to that might be too much. And then if they fail to hang on to it, right, then we might all declare, oh, it's not a two-party state after all. So I guess I want us to avoid that and kind of use a bigger picture, sort of longer-term type measure.